Saturday, the 15th of March 2025. To the Honourable Members of the Tasmanian Parliament. Subject: Ministerial oversight required to ensure justice in my submission to the Tasmanian Ombudsman, a matter of public interest and accountability. I write to you today as elected members of Parliament, entrusted with representing the Tasmanian people and upholding the integrity of government in this state. This letter addresses not only my individual case, but highlights a systemic failure of accountability, transparency and integrity, fairness and justice within multiple Tasmanian government agencies. I am making this letter public to the Tasmanian people because this is not just my fight. It is an issue of broader governance that affects us all. Despite repeated requests for action, I have been denied procedural fairness and natural justice by the Department of Education for Children and Young People, DCHEP, WorkSafe Tasmania, the Tasmanian Teacher Registration Board, and the Tasmanian Integrity Commission. I have exhausted all other avenues and am now forced to take my case to the Tasmanian Ombudsman, which represents my final attempt to receive a fair and lawful process. However, given the clear pattern of internal collusion and regulatory failure I have already encountered, ministerial oversight is now critical to ensure the Ombudsman process is not compromised in the same way. As members of Parliament, you are collectively responsible for ensuring this oversight occurs. 1. Minister Joe Palmer and Shadow Minister Sarah Lavelle. Failure of leadership and duty. I have made numerous formal requests to the Minister for Education, the Honourable Joe Palmer MP, asking her to conduct oversight and intervene in the actions of the Department of Education for Children and Young People. Despite speaking to Minister Palmer directly by phone and making repeated written requests for ministerial oversight, she has consistently refused to act. Minister Palmer has not responded to my formal requests for an internal investigation, any kind of proper investigation into DCHEP, nor has she exercised her ministerial authority to ensure procedural fairness is upheld. She could request such an investigation immediately, yet she chooses not to. I've also met with the Honourable Sarah Lavelle MP, the Shadow Minister for Education, and briefed her in detail about the serious failures of justice I have endured. Despite this, Sarah Lavelle has remained silent and failed to take any action. Her refusal to stand up against this systemic injustice raises serious concerns about her willingness to hold government accountable, even from opposition. These failures of leadership at both ministerial and shadow ministerial levels are unacceptable. The people of Tasmania deserve elected representatives who act in their interest, not public officials who ignore injustice and abandon their duty. 2. Your collective responsibility as members of Parliament. As members of Parliament, you are the ultimate guardians of Tasmania's democratic institutions. You are gifted your positions of power by the Tasmanian people, who trust you to act in their interests, not for yourself or for the convenience of government agencies. You are charged with ensuring that public sector agencies operate within the law, uphold fairness, and protect the dignity and well-being of every Tasmanian. Your legal and ethical obligations are enshrined in the Parliament Disclosure of Interests Act 1996, which requires members to act in the public interest, The Members of Parliament Code of Conduct Act 2009, which establishes integrity and accountability obligations. The Work Health and Safety Act 2012, which requires duty holders, including government agencies, to ensure a safe and fair work environment. And the Anti-Discrimination Act 1998, which prohibits discriminatory and unjust treatment in workplaces. When public sector agencies fail to act lawfully, fairly, or ethically, the responsibility to intervene and ensure justice shifts to you, the elected members of Parliament. You are collectively responsible for the conduct of agencies, including the Department of Education for Children and Young People, DCHEP, WorkSafe Tasmania, the Tasmanian Teacher Registration Board, the Tasmanian Integrity Commission. Each of these bodies has failed to uphold their statutory duties, and when those failures are being ignored by ministers and shadow ministers alike, the responsibility for oversight and intervention and redress rests with every one of you, the Members of Parliament. 3. Regulatory failure and institutional collusion. My experience reflects a pattern of systemic collusion within Tasmanian government agencies. DCHEP failed in its duty of care and to afford procedural fairness. It fabricated evidence and engaged in omission, misrepresentation, and manipulation of processes of natural justice. It misused its investigatory powers, choosing not to investigate in order to protect itself, despite investigation being a recommendation of the Royal Commission into institutional sexual abuse. WorkSafe Tasmania failed to fully investigate and name up clear breaches of psychological safety obligations under the Work Health and Safety Act 2012. The Tasmanian Teacher Registration Board accepted untested and manipulated information from the Department of Education for Children and Young People without conducting an independent or unbiased review. The TRB concealed its collusion with DCHEP by classifying key documents relied upon by decision makers as internal, therefore placing them beyond the reach of right to information requests and public scrutiny. This deliberate lack of transparency has removed any accountability for the accuracy or credibility of these documents. Given the proven fabrication, omission, and misrepresentation evident in DCHEP's documentation, this concealment is highly suspicious and undermines the trust in the integrity of the TRB's process. The Tasmanian Integrity Commission failed to investigate credible allegations of systemic misconduct and abuse of power by the Department of Education for Children and Young People. Instead, it accepted DCHEP's explanation without independent verification, despite the fact that DCHEP had conducted no formal investigation. This process disregarded the Royal Commission's clear guidance that investigations should proceed irrespective of an employee's resignation. Furthermore, the Integrity Commission recommended that my name be added to a register without establishing whether this action was justified. In doing so, they disclosed my current place of employment, which appears to have directly resulted in the termination of that employment. These agencies refer cases back and forth, avoid accountability, and refuse to take responsibility, while the individuals harmed are left disenfranchised, silenced, and without access to justice. This is not a simple failure of process. It is a systemic institutional betrayal, causing moral injury and irreparable damage to those caught within a broken system. 4. The Ombudsman as a last resort. Why ministerial oversight is urgently needed. The Tasmanian Ombudsman is now my final recourse. However, the Ombudsman cannot provide justice in a vacuum if it operates within the same culture of avoidance, bias, and internal protection that has plagued the other agencies identified. Given that Minister Jo Palmer has refused to exercise her authority to ensure an internal investigation is conducted, I am left with no option but to seek external review by the Ombudsman, and I demand ministerial oversight of this process to ensure its integrity. I am calling on Parliament to appoint a designated minister or parliamentary body to oversee the handling of my submission to the Ombudsman. Ensure accountability and transparency in the Ombudsman's process, preventing further procedural misconduct. And conduct a formal parliamentary inquiry into the systemic failures of DCHET WorkSafe Tasmania, the TRB and the Integrity Commission. And to act immediately to strengthen parliamentary oversight mechanisms for public sector agencies involved in employment-related investigations and determinations. 5. This is not just my case. It is a matter of public trust. I am making this letter public because this is not just about my case. The failures I have experienced are symptomatic of broader governance issues in Tasmania. When agencies act without oversight and ministers refuse to intervene, the people of Tasmania are failed by their government. As elected representatives, you hold your positions as a privilege granted by the Tasmanian people, not as a right. You are there to represent and protect the interests of the people, not to protect agencies or bureaucracies that engage in misconduct. The Tasmanian people are watching. They are entitled to accountability, transparency, and integrity in leadership from those in power. If you fail to act, you are complicit in the erosion of public trust and the continued harm caused by these institutional failures. 6. The misuse of public funds to defend government misconduct. It is unacceptable and deeply unjust that Tasmanian government departments are using public funds, taxpayer money, including my own, to engage legal representation to defend what appears to be clear misconduct, procedural breaches and unlawful actions. While these agencies have access to unlimited legal resources funded by the very people they are meant to serve, I am forced to represent myself, having lost my livelihood and facing significant financial hardship as a direct consequences of their actions. There is something fundamentally wrong when the machinery of government is weaponized against individuals, enabling agencies to shield themselves from accountability with taxpayer-funded legal teams, while the victims of their misconduct are left without fair means to seek justice. This imbalance undermines the principles of equality before the law and erodes public confidence in the integrity of government processes. Parliament must act to address this gross inequity and ensure that public funds are used to uphold justice, not to deny it. 7. Conclusion. Parliament must act. You are the last line of defence between public administration and corruption. I urge you to provide ministerial oversight of my submission to the Ombudsman. demand an immediate internal investigation into DCHEP's handling of my case, and commit to parliamentary inquiry and reform that ensures future public sector processes are fair, lawful and transparent. This is your responsibility as members of Parliament. I look forward to your prompt and considered response.